Welcome to season 2 of Rabbit Holes with Aaron, where we haven't made any drastic changes, but we believe we get better with time. So enjoy the wide constellation of guests that I have on this show. Enjoy our conversations. Hopefully, you get some nuggets and you can learn and grow and become a better person. Thanks for listening. Welcome to Rabbit Holes with Aaron. I'm Aaron, and with me as my guest today, I have Paul Krause, a good friend, Marine from our Marine Corps days. We were different ranks, but we ran into each other a good amount of times and got to know each other a little bit, as much as you could, be in different ranks. But yeah, he's also a firefighter, a father, and interestingly enough, or at least to me, interesting enough, he's a twin. So, I've learned a lot about twins from talking to him. But thanks for joining me today, Paul.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've been excited about this opportunity ever since we had first talked about it. So, yeah, I'm ready to see where this goes today.
Yeah. And we talked beforehand, and you assured me you have all kinds of stories.
Oh yeah,
So I'm going to give you a chance to start telling some stories. I don't know if you want to start with firefighter stories or Marine Corps stories. I'm excited to hear whatever stories you have as well. So,
yeah. So yeah, I guess we can start with the Marine Corps days. I've been thinking about it a lot recently because my niece just turned 18 2 days ago, and that was 10 days before we deployed to Iraq, which was the deployment that you and I were on together. Um, so I know we got another 8 days before I finally hit that mark where it was 18 years ago that we had left on advance party to head over there. So
wow.
um, I just can't believe how fast the time has gone by. It was one of those. Well, while I was in, it seemed like sometimes time really dragged on, and then other times, it seemed like it was just gone in a flash. And
Yeah.
we had plenty of that, especially on the deployments when you get the downtime and things are kind of quiet and you're thinking about home, and that's when it seems like it kind of drags on. And then when you get really busy, you don't realize how fast the time's actually gone by. And before you know it, you're
Yeah.
getting back on the plane or getting back on the ship and heading back, and then you have the that fun, exciting, return home and seeing everybody, family and friends and all that again. So, um, but yeah, I mean, I think my time in the Marines, especially with in 2-2 and Second Battalion, Second Marines, where we were, I spent pretty much my entire enlistment there, other than while I was at training. Um, and
Yeah.
so I made some of the best friends in my life, and that it's weird to say that you end up having this other family that sort of becomes closer than family, and it's one of those, it's a hard thing to try to explain, other than like maybe people that have been part of a sorority or a fraternity or something like that. They might actually they might know that feeling where you end up with people you spent years with, that you're very close with, you did a lot together. But the one thing I could say is, like, transitioning out of the Marine Corps and having the fire department, right there is like the next thing to roll into. It's another family. And
Oh, good.
So yeah, so that in a way makes things easy, for the transition, because I think the one thing that most people don't talk about, and I think there's more talk about it now, but what you're not really prepared for is that transition, especially out of the service. Um, and that's a lot harder. It's a lot more difficult than it seems, because especially being like if you go in when you're 18 years old, right out of high school. Like I graduated on a Friday and I left for boot camp that following Monday. So I had essentially a weekend as a civilian post high school graduation. So I really didn't know anything else. When I got out. So it's tough going from a very fast paced uh, place, because with 2-2, we did two back-to-back deployments. With the MEU was the
Yeah.
first one, and then we went to Iraq the following year. So that was only a short period of time that we were back, but we were constantly training between. And I also had um, the distinct opportunity of being what they call a combat replacement. So when I got out of ammo tech school and I checked in at 2-2, they were in Iraq, and this was December of 2005, and so there was a lot of nervousness and excitedness, at the same time, because I wasn't sure. I was thinking I was going to be like getting on a plane in a week and flying over to join them, but they only had about 2 months left on their deployment. So I got held back, and we helped get stuff ready for these guys when they came home, and that was a tough deployment for them. They had, I think, other than their Afghanistan deployment in 2009, 2010. That was, I think they took the most number of casualties. So these guys, when they came
Mm.
back, they were not great mentally, and it was, you could tell some of them were doing better than others, but that's where that like whole bond of being a Marine, whether you're a new guy or an old guy, you immediately get folded right into the mix, and we
Yeah.
helped kind of rebuild everything, and it was like just over a year after they got back that where right around a year after they got back that we ended up deploying on that MEU. So
Yeah, I wanted to say something. When you were talking about the history of 2-2 and your experience, some things popped up that like I wanted to zoom in on some stuff because you talked
yeah,
about how time moves really slow, and I can still in my mind's eye, and I took pictures of it, but I had this calendar on the wall,
yep,
and it was like the daily ritual. I went over and marked that day off, and and then that gets a little bit depressing because you're
yeah,
like, let me count up the days I have left. 150, 180, 200, and it's like, oh my gosh, like
yeah,
I can't hold a number that big in my brain, right? So I
yep,
started keeping track of time by full moons. So it's like I only have 6 more full moons to go, right? And we're all walking home in the dark. It's dark outside at night, light discipline, and so you can see the moon clear as anything. So that became like my method of counting time. Don't look at my watch. Don't look at the day. Don't look at the calendar. How
yeah,
many more? 5 more full moons. Okay, that's 5. I can count that on my hand. I can hold that in my head. It can give me hope, you know.
yep,
But it
yeah,
is a different kind of, perspective of that. And I want to let you comment on that in just a second. But I had one other thing where to illustrate kind of how it is to leave the Marine Corps
yep,
because you're doing, and I was thinking about pulling that apart a little bit because we're raised by our family, but usually you don't run together. Usually you
right,
don't fire firearms together and spend the night out in the field together. Sometimes my dad might take me on a camping trip or a hunting trip, but like it wasn't that way day after day after day, all day long. And you know, you're just moving from the one thing that was physically demanding to the other thing that's mentally demanding, and then back and forth. And that was pretty much what a training schedule looks like, just
Yeah.
to keep us flexible and mobile and like and not sitting still.
Yeah.
But yeah, I when I got out, so that was one of the reasons we're so family like. We're doing everything together, from eating
Yeah.
to pooping to running to, you know, so much more than we do normally in our traditional families. But then
Yeah.
I thought about how, and this is the story I want to transfer back over to you on. Like, I had a dream about a year after I got out. And in my dream, it was like a family reunion. I woke up, I walked into this room, I ran into a gunnery sergeant that I knew. I was like, "Hey, I haven't seen you forever." You know, we did a, you know, a handshake and a big hug, and like, "Bro, what are you doing now?" We're both in camis. We're still in the Marine Corps in my dream. And I like woke and we had a conversation. We did some stuff in my dream. I saw some other Marines I served with, and I woke up and like I remember I went right into tears because I was like, I'm never going to see these guys again the rest
Yeah.
of my life. Like right, and you know, it's one thing to say you go to tears. I'm a guy. I'm a Marine. I'm a gunnery sergeant. I'm all these things. But in that moment, the loss was so great that it like
Yeah.
overwhelmed everything. You know, the reality of the loss. Now, I found a solution, which is how I came by to meet you, and I ran into other Marines all along my trip around America. But, like, at that moment, I just felt that loss, that tremendous loss. So I'm sorry, I'm going to turn it back over to you, but those are the stories, and that's how Rabbit Holes works. Like, you're
Yeah.
talking, you're telling a story, and I'm like, wait a minute. That makes me think of this. And so you can also, like, at any time interrupt with a rabbit hole you realize. But anyway,
Yeah.
back to you can comment on any of those things, or you can go back to telling the story, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, so I mean, I totally agree. Like, and I think the one thing that we're also doing that sets us apart from our actual blood family is that we're just trying to survive. And depending on where you found yourself in the world, whether it was Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, somewhere in Africa, um, we typically weren't in the greatest of situations, and we honestly like relied on each other to survive, to actually get home. And we always say it. It's not about us, it's about the Marine to the left and the right of us. And especially if you get into
Mm-hmm.
combat, that's what it's all about. And like I'll never forget on our on the first deployment on our MEU, we were in Qatar doing training, and we were just in the middle of nowhere. Like, I don't even know what province we were in, what city. We were just in the middle of nowhere, and we had I think it was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 days before we were leaving, and this huge sandstorm came through, and it was like 50-knot winds sustained. It was like being sandblasted, and I remember, like, there were these telltale signs that this sandstorm was about to hit, and you'd always have this like little bit of rain that started, and then you had a matter of
Mm.
minutes after the rain stopped before this sandstorm would come through. And most of the time they weren't that big. You might get some gusts that would blow a porta john over with somebody in it, but it wasn't as bad as this night. And I remember I got into the tent that H&S company was in. And for those who don't know what H&S is, headquarter and service company. So it's the everybody that supports the infantry guys in the infantry companies. And so I walk into the tent, and like it starts blowing outside, and somebody yelled, "Hey, Krause, like grab the flap." And so I went to grab the flap for the tent to pull it down so we could secure it, so it helped keep the sand and stuff out of the tent. And like the as soon as I grabbed it, the flap ripped right out of my hand, and then like I turn around, and this is like it was like a small circus tent. These things were
Yeah.
pretty large, and they had these big posts in the center that hold this tent up, and they were off of the ground. Like the wind was strong enough to actually pull the poles up a few feet off of the ground, and all of a
Wow.
sudden the poles all came in. The whole tent just collapsed on all of us, and we were literally crawling between cots and under the cots. And every time we got to a new cot, we reach up, check it to make sure nobody was up there, and then we kept going. We tried to work our way out. Everybody's yelling for one another, trying to figure out where everybody is, try to get everybody out so that we can get accountability. And I remember coming out of this tent, and it was like hell on earth. Like I've never experienced anything like this before. And I see the motor T guys, hand on a shoulder in a line, just making their way towards motor T, just can barely make them out in the distance. We get everybody kind of together. Like I just wanted to be back under the tent because it felt safer under the tent than outside. And
Yeah.
but we get accountability of everybody, and we realize that like my best friend, who's still in the Marine Corps, is actually getting promoted to Master Gunnery Sergeant, I think next month. But he is he was unaccounted for. We knew he was at he had gone to like the MWR tent, so he could try to call home, and that was like all the way across the camp. And
Oh
so a
no.
couple of us decided to brave the elements, and we made our way over, and we kind of were like bounding slowly from tent to tent because you really couldn't see, and we were just trying to go off of like our memory essentially at that point, trying to figure out
Yeah.
how many tents over it was, how many tents down, and we finally get to the tent. And this thing is blown up on its side. It was a totally different tent, but it's blown up on its side. So the normal entrance that we had been using was not accessible. We finally figured out a way to get in, and this was the first time I ever saw. My buddy Means, black guy. This is the first time I've ever seen a black guy like white. He was pale white because he had no idea what was going on outside. He just knew that the tent flipped while they were inside, and nobody wanted to go outside to find out what was going on. And so we told him, like,
Yeah.
dude, like the tent's gone. All of our stuff is underneath it, but like we gotta try to make our way back. And there were a few other guys from H&S that were in the tent. And so once we explained what was going on, we're like, listen, it's not that bad. We'll probably be better off outside trying to get back. And so we all, again, got kind of just teamed up in a row. Everybody had, physical contact with each other, and we just made our way back. But I'll never forget, like, the storm ended at like midnight on the dot on April 13th. It was a Friday, and I was like,
Huh.
Friday the 13th. It just stuck out in my head. But it was like as soon as it came through, all of a sudden it was just over, and then it was a matter of kind
Huh.
of picking up after that. And so the rest of that time in the desert, we were sleeping under the stars because, like I said, the tent was totally shredded. It was like not able to be
Oh.
salvaged. So when the sun came up the next morning, everybody went through it. Like we got cots and gear and everything pulled out, kind of got everything resecured, and then carried out the plan of the day from there. Like but it just like things didn't stop because we lost essentially our home, right? Like now we just had
Yeah.
to adjust, and we found a new place to stay. And like I said, we were sleeping on cots underneath the stars for the rest of the time, and it was quite the experience. But I feel like that moment brought us all together, especially as the
Sure.
S4 shop. Like everybody that was there, like we all survived that together. And, we took a big group photo at the end, and, it's one of those like fond moments where it's like, but did you die? No, we didn't. So like, the mission
Yeah.
continues. So, but it's like
Yeah,
crazy
that
stuff like
reminds me
that.
of. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's like crazy stuff like that like I've never experienced with my family, and I hope I never have to experience anything like that with my family. But
Yeah, it's like a firefighting experience almost because of visibility. You can't see anything. From what I understand, I'm not a firefighter, but that's what I hear. I have a cousin who's a firefighter, and from yourself, like there's not a lot of visibility. There's smoke inside a house, and you got to kind of feel yourself around and not lose your buddy and
yep,
all of that.
yeah, and I mean it's probably like the closest thing to like a firefighting experience. And it's one of those things
Sure.
where like you know some people say, oh, when you say you're joining the military, like, oh, what are you, crazy? But like, there's this sense of adventure and this like, level of risk that I feel like as a young man, like, or as a late teenager, I feel like you kind of
Yeah.
have this like, you have to be able to prove to yourself that you can go out there and you can survive in the world. And I mean, there's
Yeah.
no better way to prove that than going in the military and totally essentially cutting ties with your family. Like, you are on your own and you are at the mercy of um, you know your command, and all your buddies. And then fast forward, like, you put yourself into like a firefighting role. Like, it's the same thing. You have all of this crazy chaos going on around you. You have an environment that most people are not trying to go into, and here we
Right.
are gearing up, and like we're charging in there, and there's like
Yeah.
I think we've talked about this before. Where like I wouldn't consider myself an adrenaline junkie by any means, but there is like there is no I, it sounds crazy, but there's no better feeling than being geared up and then running into something like that, and it's that level of danger, that risk, but at the same time, you're doing it not just for chasing that adrenaline high. You're doing it to actually help somebody, because
Yeah.
the fire department, you're showing up no matter what is. If somebody's calling 911, it's because they are having the worst day of their life, at least at that point.
Right.
So knowing that we bring a skill set um, and equipment that can help change that, and hopefully for the better for people.
Yeah.
That's why, like, getting out of the military. Like, I grew up in a fire service family. Like, my mom, my dad were both volunteer firefighters. My grandfather, uncles, great uncles were all in the fire service between full time and volunteer. So like, I feel like it's in my blood, and it was something I knew I wanted to do, and that was
Yeah.
part of the reason why I decided to get out of the Marine Corps, was because I wanted to pursue the fire service. And so yeah, so I think, that, like I said, between the brotherhood and the sisterhood in the Marine Corps, directly relates over to the fire service. And then you take those skill sets of, you have to either be a good follower, in the fire service, because there's a rank structure you have to follow, just like in the military. And
Yeah.
and then you're working. I think I had the advantage going into the military, and then going into, like, jumping right into it, becoming very active in the fire service afterwards. Is I came out with leadership experience. So I've
Yeah.
always considered myself to be a good follower, as much as a good leader. So no matter what situation I'm in, like somebody's in charge, like, hey, all right, what do you need? And if I'm in charge,
Yeah.
then I fall back on the skills that I learned in the military, and then the experience and the skills and the training that I've gotten since I've got out to just make that even better. Because as a leader, and this as being a retired gunny, but being in a staff NCO role, like um, it's no longer just about you. It's about all of those Marines. It's about those firefighters that are below you, and you got to make sure that they go
Yeah.
on at the end of the day. So it's
Yeah.
like I said, I feel like it's just like it's one of those like direct paths that they just
Yeah.
immediately connect over.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and there's a lot of things like that the Marine Corps gives us, right? I mean, I'm not even, and I think about it a lot, and I use it a lot. Use leadership experience, organizational experience, even how to write emails. I mean, I use everything I learned in the Marine Corps in real life all the time. It just like fills in little skills here and there, and then like a confidence
Yeah,
that it just says, I'm the one in charge here. This is what we need to do. And you go do that. And it's like instantly moving to delegation. And
yeah,
that reminds me of a really quick story to illustrate your point. Was like I was going to a cowboy church, which is just a little bit different church. They have an arena, they do cowboy stuff. I don't know if you've heard of them, but also for my listeners, like, and it's specifically, we've seen them mostly in Texas. But anyway, I was going to this cowboy church, and they're like, we got to get all the chairs and the tables out of this room and get it into that room over there. And I was like, just mostly I just want to be a worker bee anymore,
yeah,
right? I've been in leadership, I've been responsible for other Marines' lives and all of their equipment and everything else, and it always worked out okay. But now it's like I just want to be a lance corporal, and that's all the jobs I have
yeah,
are basically lance corporal stuff, part-time jobs, keep me busy, beekeeping, podcasting, pottery. And so I got something for the Lance Corporal to do, but then there's every once in a while, like the situation of Cowboy Church. They were carrying these chairs down. Each person was carrying chairs down this hallway, and it was clogged. And they were having to wait for a person to come back for a person with a chair to go through. And I was like, why aren't we doing a line, right?
yeah,
The skills that Marines have, right? Why aren't we doing a line? I've done that on Navy ships to
yep,
move supplies from one ship to another. I've done that with aircraft. I've done that on the ground. I mean, I'm like an expert at the pass line. And I was
yeah,
like, okay, you guys, and I just stepped right up. I was like, you guys stop. Okay, and you guys hand your chairs to them. Now go get
yep,
more. And like I had to walk it through, but
yeah,
once I got it started with a few words, it was over like that. Like all the chairs were in the room. They were like, and the next time it came up, they were like, Aaron's in charge of getting the chairs in the other room.
yeah,
And I had those skills from the Marine Corps. I
yeah,
mean, how to move tons of equipment from over there to over there. I know that.
yeah,
Out of one quad con to another or whatever, we form a line. But go ahead.
yep.
I'm sorry. Your turn.
No, absolutely. I mean, like, I totally agree. I end up finding myself in the same situation when there's a truck that needs to get offloaded or needs to get loaded, and it's like instead of everybody grabbing one or two things at a time and walking it there and going back, like, oh, hey, get into the assembly line, let's go. Like this is gonna end up moving a whole lot faster. And but it's like
Yeah.
I guess if you've never been in, you've never had to do something like that, coordinate something like that. Not that it's anything super difficult, but like I think you don't know what you don't know, So if you don't know that there's an easier
Right.
way, you've always done it this way. When you get somebody that has a differing view and is like, hey, let's make life a whole lot easier because I am a firm believer of let's work smarter, not harder. Um, and it makes things go a lot easier, makes things go a lot quicker. um, and like I mean, what's better than that? Everybody's short for time these days, so
Yeah.
if you can save yourself 10 or 15 minutes, like you can get something else done here. But
Yeah.
um,
Well, and I think there's a reliance And maybe the other branches, I don't know. Maybe probably I'll pick on the Air Force. Probably the Air Force. They wait around and a machine comes over and picks up all the all the sea bags and it transports and puts it on the aircraft and they hadn't do anything. We're like, what do we got? What machines do we got? We got Marines. That's all we got. Okay,
Yeah,
well, let's use the things we got to move tons of equipment from way over there to way over there.
yeah,
We use what we have. And I think that's the definition of the Marine Corps, really.
yeah. And I mean, like we do more with less. And I'm not saying that in a way like a lot of these companies now, they try to, you know, they try to get people to do more roles and put more on their plate, more on their plate. And it's not that. It is you physically don't have equipment. You're in the middle of
Yeah,
nowhere. All you have is just brute strength of the manpower you have on the ground. And I think the Marine Corps does a fantastic job at capturing that. And maybe it's by design. um, Maybe not, but it's one of
yeah.
those
Let's
that,
cut their funding and see what they do.
yeah, they're still like, we're still gonna get the job done, but you're gonna have a lot. And
Yeah,
I think at a certain point too, it also builds a certain level of anger that they can use when the time's needed. Like, all right, all that anger you've been building up for the last 6 months, like this is the time now. Put
yeah,
all that extra energy into this task. Um, because there's honestly there's no finer fighting force than the Marine Corps. Um, and it doesn't matter how chaotic the situation is. I think if you have Marines around, people are going to end up kind of flocking to them because they're going to see these guys with a cool head, um, and they're going to stay mission focused. And I had a close call at a fire back in November. It was Thanksgiving week. It was early on Monday morning before Thanksgiving, and we got there pretty much what I would consider your average fire, and nothing that was out of control, nothing that should have tripped us up. And we got inside, and I had actually a brand new Navy corpsman. He was volunteering with us for a couple of years, and then he decided he was going to join the Navy Reserves, became a corpsman. So you got a corpsman on the nozzle. I'm backing him up, and we get inside this house, and the fire's knocked down. We're just looking to see if there's any pockets that we've missed. And pretty much, like, honestly, I thought that we were just kind of wrapping things up. And my best friend growing up, he showed up. He comes in. He's like, "Hey, what do you need?" I'm like, "Search the first floor." We didn't get a full search. Everybody said that they were out, but the fire service, we can't confirm everybody
double
is
check.
actually out of the house until we actually get eyes on, and physically check. So
Right.
he's like, "I got you." So he goes back. We were like in the front door to the right in this kitchen, and so he goes back towards the front door, and he comes back and he's like, "Hey, you got some fire behind you." And I look back, I'm like, "All right, cool. Nothing big. Like I can see it. Nothing like we've had this before." So I tell my guy in the nozzle, I'm like, "Hey, we got to back up. We got to reposition this. We got some fire behind us." And we back the line up, and I get like just past the entryway into the kitchen, and I look, and this is growing rapidly. This is a lot more than I thought it was,
Yeah.
and I at first, my very first thought, and this is one of those things that, like, I've experienced this multiple times for my life when something crazy is about to happen. It seems like time slows way down. It's like watching a car accident
Yeah.
about to happen. Like, it's like time slows down. You're like, oh, they're gonna avoid it, and then all of a sudden, right before the collision, boom, everything speeds up, and that's, and then you're like, oh, holy cow, and so yeah, so like the first thought, the way this fire was rolling over the ceiling, I'm like, first thought in my head was, this is really cool. And I had like just seen this at another fire, like maybe 2 weeks before. Um, and it, and again, it wasn't getting out of control, but it was just the way this thing was rolling up. And, we repositioned the line, knock it down. Right. So, but then I realized like, that's like that slow down period. Right. And then next thing I know, like everything starts lighting up, and I recognize that we're in a bad spot. And we had an impending flashover, and a flashover is when everything in a space is heated to its ignition temperature. So pretty
Mm.
much it's like, as soon as this thing goes, if you're any more than um, like, I think they say if you're any more than like 10 feet in a space when a flashover occurs, it's not survival. Um, and
Mm.
so I recognize what's going on. I hear my buddy say, "Hey, we got to go," and so I'm telling my nosman he hasn't quite gotten out of the hallway yet. And I was like, "Hey, like you got to move faster, faster, faster," But trying to keep a cool head, because if you panic, like everything's just going to get
Oh
worse,
yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
but all I could think of was I can't leave until he's out of here,
Right.
and that like goes right back to the Marine Corps, like it's like you're
Right.
not going to leave somebody behind. And so he gets out, I'm like, bro, we gotta go. And as soon as he like cleared it and he was in line with the door, I gave him a shove. He went out the front door, peeled to the right. The fire is like, only maybe 3 feet off the floor at that point, and like we're burning. But I get out the door, go under the railing, and and like, but it was one of those, like, again, you come out and like this just went really bad, really fast, but you got to get accountability, make sure everybody's good.
Right.
And as soon as everybody's good, we got to get back into the action. It's like, you have a gun
Yeah.
go down in a firefight, you got to get that gun back up and you got to get it back into play, or things aren't going to get any better. And
Right.
so yeah, so like, didn't even think anything about it. It was just like, and it was just from like one to the next, next step. And I remember like talking about it afterwards, like it didn't hit me until quite a while later. I was driving home from the firehouse, and that was when it hit me, like how close we just came to being
Yeah.
torched, and I had this like moment. When I got home, I had to just sit in the driveway for a minute and like gather myself, um, because like that was when like the thoughts of like, oh man, like can only imagine having to make that phone call to my wife and tell her, hey, I'm on my way to the burn unit, um, and but it's same thing with like being in a deployment. You end up having a close call, and like it's not, most of the time your family isn't like the first thing right at the front of your head. You're like, it's everybody that
Right.
you're trying to make sure everybody's okay, everybody survives, and then you got to get out of that situation. And then it's once that adrenaline and everything really kind of starts to dial back. That's when you have these floods of emotion. And like this is like going back to like transitioning out of the Marine Corps. Like I feel
Yeah.
like I wasn't really prepared for like all those emotions, because you go from being a part of a bigger unit, and feeling like you have a sense of purpose, to now you're just back out in the street, and you're back to being a civilian. And I remember I got into some trouble at the firehouse, a few times after I got out, because like the way we act and the things that we say in the Marine Corps, is not really accepted practice in the the civilian
Right.
world. So
Right.
they had to remind me, a few times, like, you can't just like say what you think. Um, and because like when you're on a truck or you're wearing a uniform, like you're a direct representation of that organization. So and then like then I was in college, and I was in college in freshman classes with 17-year-olds, like kids that hadn't even turned 18 yet, and
Yeah.
they had no real life experience, and
Right.
so it was difficult sitting in these classes and listening to these kids um, talk about like, I guess, maybe things that might be bothering them, or whatever, maybe some complaints, or but like, I'm thinking, man, like, if you think that's bad, like, just wait, like,
Yeah.
things could be so much worse. um and then and for most of my time at college, when I was in classes, I didn't open up um with the class until partway through the semester, just because I was trying to get a read on how receptive they would be, to having a veteran in the class. And I took a lot of philosophy classes, which I thought was great, because with like philosophy, you can honestly relate everything you're learning about to your real life, to what's going on currently,
Yeah.
to what you've been through in the past. And a lot of those were like the classes where, like, I I felt like I had to tread carefully initially to feel out um you know the makeup of the class before I started open up some of those conversations. And also, I think at the
Yeah.
time, like, I didn't even know how to talk about some of this stuff, and I was shut off. I drank a lot, initially, and I think the one thing that kind of um, pulled me away from um, alcohol and drinking pretty much nightly was getting my Fire One certification. And like, I realized you can't be drunk and be going to fire calls. And so if you're drunk all the time,
Right.
you're not going to be going to fires. And this is what I want to do. And so I replaced alcohol with serving others, and through the fire
Mm.
service. So but it took a long time. I still, there's certain things I don't talk about with my family, and I think it's just some of that stuff. It's sometimes I feel like it may be something I wasn't proud of doing, or something along those lines. But also, like, I feel like I just had emotionally shut off for so long that it's
Yeah.
hard to kind of open that back up. And um, you know especially back when we were in, being emotional, like being vulnerable, wasn't something that we did. It was, suck it up. We're moving on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have time to be getting all touchy
Yeah.
feely with our emotions. And
Right.
you mentioned getting teared up at times. And like, I finally, it was probably four 4 years ago now, maybe. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I feel like I kind of hit like an emotional breaking point. And I remember driving to work, and like all of a sudden I just started crying. And this was going on for like a couple weeks, and it just come out of nowhere. And it was just when I was like stuck in my head and my thoughts. And there was actually, I felt like there was a lot of kind of relief that came out of it. Like, I feel like all the stuff that I've been holding in between time in the service, and then some of the pretty traumatic calls that I've had in the fire service, like
Yeah.
all that stuff finally came to a head. And one thing like I'm very grateful for is a friend of mine and his wife back in the early 2000 teens, um, maybe 2015, 26, maybe mid teens, but I was kind of in a rough spot, and they noticed it. And he was an Afghan veteran from the Connecticut National Guard, and so they had told me like, hey, there's this organization here in Connecticut. It's the vet center, and they're like, it's like kind of through the VA, but you don't have to go through the VA. And they provide mental health support, counseling, one-on-one group sessions. They do marriage counseling. They're like, you should really check it out, And I was kind of leery about it, but I also I realized that I needed to do something, and so I reached out to the vet center, and I got into counseling, and it did wonders, and it was just nice to be able to
Yeah.
go and talk to somebody, and to be able to get the stuff off your chest without feeling like you're going to be judged, whether you're actually judged by people you're talking to or not. Like, I think most of the time, if somebody's willing to lend an ear when you're having essentially a mental health crisis, like, those people aren't judging you, and I think that's one of the things that um needs to be brought out there more, is that, like, you got to talk to somebody. If you feel like you got to talk to somebody, you got to go talk to somebody. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I can say I agree with you, but I've been through 7 years of counseling, personal counseling for myself. And I did not really have, I mean, the Marine Corps is pretty traumatic at its base, just like getting up and going to work and 16-hour days, and you're going to deploy and be away from your family. There's a lot of traumatic kind of things there that civilian population doesn't really have something like or similar to. But I didn't experience any like combat or nothing blew up around me. I don't have any traumatic brain injuries. I'm a pretty well adjusted, pretty healthy person, but I needed a few years of counseling when I got out as a gunnery sergeant to be ready to deal with people that are not in the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps is probably a little bit more eccentric than other services to some extent, and thereby a little bit more traumatic, giving you a little bit more to process. But yeah, this transition thing, people think, well, we're going to send you to a week-long class and you're going to
Yeah,
be good to go,
yeah,
and it's like, it's been how many years now? 13. I'm still not completely good to go, and I don't have any of the serious traumas. People that don't have arms and limbs, they get blown up and they wake up in a hospital in America. They're trying to put their life back together. They were 150 pounds, now they're 300 pounds,
yeah,
and their arms and legs don't work or whatever. It's like pick up the pieces and start from the beginning again. And I was starting from a pretty intellectual, and I was a pretty emotionally consistent person in the Marine Corps. But then I get out and it's just like I said, times of crying for no reason, like you're talking about. And it's like it catches up with you, but it's not linear, and it doesn't catch up with you, in a certain amount of time. And
yeah,
1 week isn't going to handle it. But it is a bigger monster than maybe we can even handle. But I like how the government is paying like nonprofits to offer us counseling for free. And
yeah,
that was a life changing thing. It sounds like for you, but definitely for me as well. But yeah, I just wanted to hit on that for a second because transition for veterans is a big and ugly topic. And we look to the VA to handle it or manage it, but it's a lot bigger than anybody can handle or manage because it just takes so many factors, right? Time. What
yeah,
factors help with it? You could say time, friendship, love, romance, having kids, going to college, learning things, reading books. There's so many ways, and we've each found our own way,
Yeah.
to manage it and to kind of get around it and wrap our head around it. But yeah, I just want to take a second for all veterans and kind of talk about that for whoever that may be a civilian is listening. That it's some tough stuff, and especially now you're a
Yeah.
firefighter. I would imagine, the counseling thing is just a wonderful way of working through everything. Okay, that was a serious fire. I'm going to be getting into counseling, or I'm going to just continue weekly counseling, or whatever. How does
Yeah.
that find its place into your life right now in your routine?
So I'm pretty much on like every 2 week cycle with going to the vet center. This is my second round going there. I was there for probably four. I think it was about 4 years, almost 5 years the first time. And I remember like my counselor saying like, like, hey, like I feel like we're in a good spot. Like, how are you feeling? I feel like I'm night and day different compared to when I first showed up. And
Yeah,
so that was kind of like at the time we had the conversation about like ending our sessions. But she's like, listen, at any point you feel like you need to be topped off, you need to come back and just like you just call and we'll get you right in, and she also had kind of left it like this is not like I like it was more like I hope this is the end point, but there's there's a real possibility you could essentially end up back here, and it was good knowing that you have that like that life net, and yeah, so fast
yeah,
forward a few years, and I had some other stuff, other stressors, and a whole lot more on it was a new dad, um and just dealing with some like added stress at work. And so
yeah,
like again, it all just kind of started piling up, and that was when, like I said, I kind of hit this new point where like all of a sudden I was just like crying out of nowhere. So like this time it didn't take long at all. Like I recognized I needed to get back there, and I called them, and there was no hesitation about it. And
yeah,
unfortunately, the counselor that I had previously had moved on to another job. But I went in, did like the interview with them, and then they got me fitted with another counselor. And I've had two or three since I've been back there, and it's been great because a lot of the stuff that's built up, whether it's stuff at home, stuff at work, stuff at the firehouse, um, a lot of it relates back to my time in the service, and uh, one of the things that I have like kind of one of the things that I struggle most with is this like anxiety of when things start going to, we're doing this, no, we're not doing this, we're doing this, we're not doing this, and that's when things really start like I can feel like that pot starting to boil because it goes back to like my first deployment, and we were off the coast of Somalia. We're around Somalia, Kenya, and the 15th MEU out of I think it was California. They were in Ramadi, and they were just absolutely getting slaughtered. And their deployment had gotten extended, and so they kept putting in this request to have the 26th MEU come and relieve them. And so we kept getting like this word like, hey, it's not for certain, but get your gear ready, get prepared. We might be steaming north and going to relieve these guys. And so at this point, like this is what I signed up for, and so I start to get amped up, and then all of a sudden word comes down, nope, stand down, we're not going. And then a couple of days later, oh, hey, another request just went out. They want us to come relieve them, and this
yeah,
went back and forth like 5 times, and it was all over the course of maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and that takes a toll on like your nervous system of being amped up, ready to rock and roll, like we're going, and then all of a sudden to be shut down, and to have that like repeatedly, like that is something that has kind of stuck with me, and it's one of those things that like I recognize when these things are happening now, um, and I
Yeah.
can try to like pull myself back from it and be like, all right, hey, listen, this is not a life or death right now. This is not that same situation, because I ran into a guy when we were in Iraq in '08 that he was with the 15th MEU. And when he found out, we were talking, he found out that we were the battalion on the 26th MEU. He's like, why didn't you guys come relieve us? And those guys
Yeah.
thought we were the ones saying no, we're not going. When in reality, it was the admiral that was in charge of the region at the time. He wanted that MEU to remain mobile, and not commit it, because the previous year they had the whole Lebanon thing, and the 24th MEU had to go in and evacuate the embassy, and so I think he wanted to make sure that there was that essentially that world's 911 force that was available to get sent anywhere.
Right.
And it didn't happen on our deployment. I guess thankfully, but still, like I said, that was a hard conversation
Yeah.
having with this guy, and that like stuck with me, because it made me feel like, man, like there's a whole battalion plus here looking at over a thousand Marines that are potentially looking at us as being the ones saying, no, we're not going to come help you out when you're taking heavy casualties and your deployment just got extended. To me, I don't think that
Yeah.
that was fair for them, but it is what it is. Like I said, you're at the mercy of who's in command, and but yeah, but that's something, like I said, that was just one of those things that was like, another one of those pieces of straw on the camel's back, that eventually, like, the camel gets weak when there's enough of it stacked up. So but that, like I said, I can't say enough good things about the vet center, because you don't have to cut through all the red tape
Yeah.
that you do with going through the VA. And they get you right in. They get you fitted with a counselor that works best with you, that you feel comfortable with, and it's something that I wish the civilian world had, because there's plenty of people looking for counseling now. There's not enough counselors. Um, Most insurances are limiting you to maybe 5 sessions. In 5 sessions, you're not even
Yeah.
scratching the surface of what's going on before you have
Right.
to start paying out of pocket, and most people can't afford to pay out of pocket. Um, so yeah, that's one thing. Like I said, I'm very very grateful for, and I hope it's something that stays around a long time, and continues to provide these services. And I hope guys realize that this is a safe place to go to, and that is very worthwhile. Um, and I know they've saved countless lives,
Oh yeah.
with getting people into there and getting them into counseling. So
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, we're getting close to the time to end, but I just am amazed with all the topics we've talked about, and I really like some of the topics we talked about without talking about them, like how guys have emotional needs, how guys do reach a breaking point at some point, because there's so much controversy around what it means to be a man nowadays. It's so much controversy, but we can take a lot, but we do eventually break down, and we do need to do maintenance on ourselves.
yeah,
We may be in some ways stronger, maybe less and less as women work out more and more, but in some ways stronger, maybe even emotionally to where we can bear more for a certain amount of time. But there's always a cost, and there's always fatigue, and there's always emotional fatigue. And so, we're not immortal. And
yeah,
it just sounds like you have a really good maintenance plan for yourself to keep yourself doing what you're supposed to do, raising your family, doing your job, saving lives as a firefighter, functioning as a member of your town and your society there in Connecticut. And And so I like all the things we talked about by really by living them and not really by talking about them as much. And so thank you for being vulnerable today with me, and thank you for sharing this moment. It's
Yeah,
been a
absolutely.
treat.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I mean, I gotta give a shout out to my wife because man, she you've met her and she really holds down the fort. You know, she's working full time. She's got the kids when I'm away at a 24 or 48 hour shift. You know, she knows it's usually we get a call as soon as dinner's almost ready to get put on the table. You know, and now she's wrestling the kids, try to get them to eat all by herself. You know, so you know,
Yeah.
like I said, I'm so grateful to met her and that she's like stuck this out because like I said, like it takes a special person to be a wife of a first responder, a wife of a military veteran, um, and you know, and then just as you know the extended family as well. You know, like
Oh
parents are
yeah.
always there to support you. You know, and like you know, I'm lucky. Like I had a great upbringing, great parents. I've got you know a very close, good family. So like it's nice knowing that you have that support role there and that support network. So when you need them, you know they're there for you. Like I can't say enough about that. So, but I appreciate you having me on and being able
Yeah.
to share some of these stories.
Well, and thank you for bringing it full circle too. It's like we really are dependent upon our support network, and it's so important to work on that. You know, for those of us who don't have a family right by us that way, it is find your support network, find your people. You know,
Yeah,
wherever you got to find them, maybe online or whatever, and you know, be vulnerable and share and make relationships and make friendships, and that's what life's all about. And we do look so much better with good wives,
yeah,
don't we?
absolutely, absolutely.
I- I'd be eating TV dinners and living in a cave somewhere probably, and would have never explored all of America if my wife didn't come up with that idea. So it's like,
Yeah,
yeah, we definitely let's throw some shout out back to those who support us so perfectly and so well as well, and
absolutely.
we're going to try our best for them. But, well, thank you, Paul, and thank you to all the listeners. I hope this has been an educational, but also just a fun journey to be on. And thank you so much for all your stories again, Paul. And we'll look forward to talking to you again. We've just barely tapped the surface of all
Oh
the rabbit
yes,
holes we have to explore. So
yeah. Oh yeah,
thank you for making some time too.
absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye, everyone.